The world is concerned about Russia's tactical nuclear weapons drills expansion amid escalating global tensions. As the Ukraine crisis continues, the announcement sends a powerful signal to the West. This move means what? Is it a show of might or a real fear that Russia could unleash nuclear chaos if French troops are in Ukraine? Let's examine this nuclear standoff's unknowns and their implications. Investigate Russia's nuclear threats. Russia's Ministry of Defense stated that upcoming drills will demonstrate the buildup and potential use of non-strategic nuclear weapons, though there is no formal definition for tactical nuclear weapons. These low-yield, short-range weapons target battlefield forces, not population centers, and include bombs, torpedoes, artillery, and mines forward deployed to bases. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists estimates Russia holds 58 tactical nuclear weapons, with 784 in its naval forces and 334 in its air force, primarily bombers, but also capable of being launched by fighter jets like the Su-57. The drills will involve missile units in Russia's southern military area, the Russian Navy, aerospace forces, and units in eastern and southern Ukraine. Despite Ukraine's strategic resilience, bolstered by Western aid, Russia continues to focus on its nuclear forces to maintain parity amid NATO's conventional military dominance. Russia's recent gains in Ukraine, albeit small and costly, have helped boost Vladimir Putin's position, ensuring his re-election without opposition. Meanwhile, Ukraine's ammunition shortages in 2024 have given Russia some advantage. However, new artillery supplies are arriving, including 1.5 million shells from non-Western countries and Western aid packages, including $61 billion from the U.S., which will strengthen Ukraine's defense. As the material window narrows, Russia may increase offensive operations to exploit Ukrainian weaknesses. Western leaders, led by French President Macron, are showing growing resolve to support Ukraine, with even the prospect of European soldiers entering the conflict to ensure Russian failure. Changes in Western attitudes. Macron has stated that Russia is the sole aggressor and that Europe must do everything to prevent Russia from winning. Other Western leaders have increasingly supported Ukraine in using its weapons more aggressively. British Foreign Secretary David Cameron pledged $4 billion in aid on May 2nd, emphasizing that Ukraine should be allowed to use British weapons to strike Russian targets, including the Storm Shadow cruise missile, which can hit targets at least 249 kilometers away. These missiles have been effective in Crimea, including damaging the Russian submarine Rostov-on-Don on September 23rd. In addition to Storm Shadows, Britain pledged 1,600 missiles worth $622 million. France also promised its version of the missile Scalp. Russia has warned that NATO troop involvement in Ukraine would escalate the conflict, with Putin suggesting it could lead to World War III. NATO's Steadfast Defender exercise in early 2023, the largest since the Cold War, drew Russian protests. As Ukraine faces a shortage of weapons and ammunition, Western aid is expected to increase in the latter half of the year, putting more pressure on Russia and Putin. Russia's nuclear policy allows the use of nuclear weapons in response to a mass destruction or existential threat. The Chaget, Russia's nuclear launch control system, is always with the president, similar to the U.S. nuclear football, and is connected to military commanders via the Kazbek network. Only the president can order a nuclear strike, with the launch and cancel buttons visible on Russian state TV in 2019. Putin's nuclear policy: no first use to tactical threats. If Putin decided Russia was in danger, he could transmit a launch order to its troops, which would arrive soon. Russia can automate the order with a dead hand or perimeter computer network. Russia's nuclear doctrine doesn't ban first strikes, despite appearances. The Soviet Union had a no-first-use nuclear weapons policy in the 1980s, but it was never sincere. The Soviets considered a preemptive nuclear assault during NATO's Able Archer 83 drill. The new Russian Federation abolished no first use in 1993. Russia is a dictatorship, thus official laws and policies mean little. Nuclear strike if Putin does it. If he wanted to attack, there was no power to stop him. Putin indicated last year that he saw no reason to revise Russia's nuclear posture, although some hardliners want him to. Putin's newest nuclear words and drills were viewed with reluctance in Ukraine and the West, as have his prior nuclear overtures since the war. In response, Ukraine's military intelligence official Andrei Yusov claimed Putin's regime uses nuclear blackmail constantly. Such practices have been frequent since the war began. Putin placed his nuclear forces on alert days after the invasion. This was certainly an attempt to deter Western weaponry and financial backing for Ukraine. That failed. Putin bragged that Russia had unmatched weapons of mass devastation and would use all means to preserve the motherland in September 2022 as Russian forces retreated from Kharkiv and Kherson oblasts. "I'm not bluffing," Putin said. Putin deployed tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus in the summer of 2023 to clarify. Old Soviet bases for such weapons were revived. However, none of these nuclear actions affected the conflict on the battlefield or diplomatically. How would Putin respond to French troops in Ukraine? This is why Putin's recent nuclear saber-rattling hasn't impressed anyone. Imagine Macron's rhetoric and the French military intervening. Will this unusual incident make Putin's nuclear threats real? French forces in Ukraine would be a major war development. How would Putin react? Is it an existential threat? The deployment of French forces alone would not necessarily escalate the Ukraine war into World War III. NATO is defensive only. North Atlantic Treaty members are not required to help each other if one participate in an overseas trip on their own. Imagine Macron and France sending soldiers to Ukraine. Paris alone would decide. The French could not rely on NATO to defend their forces in Ukraine if they took such unilateral action. Putin may conclude that Russia is not in imminent danger and need not use nuclear weapons in response if NATO remains silent. Another factor should be considered. Russia relies on a variety of international alliances to maintain its economy, military, and society, despite its invasion of Ukraine. Breaking the nuclear taboo would strain these connections. North Korea may not care and continue supplying Russia with artillery shells and other weapons, but the relationship isn't crucial. Three connections have proven key in a Russian conflict. This begins with Turkey. Ukraine has bought Turkish armaments, including the Bayraktar TB2 drone. It also restricted the Dardanelles and Bosporus to Russian Navy ships, according to the 1936 Montreux Convention, preventing the Black Sea Fleet from being strengthened. However, Turkey has been less harsh with Russia than its NATO allies. Turkey has escaped Western sanctions and become Russia's fourth largest energy buyer. Turkey used its connection with Russia for geopolitical hedging before the war. Turkey tried to preserve good relations with Russia despite its demand for Crimea and tensions in Syria. The best example was the acquisition of the S-400 air defense system, which led to American sanctions and F-35 exclusion. Turkey forged ties with Russia to counterbalance the West. Hedging with Russia was crucial for Ankara because the West opposed several of Turkey's Middle East initiatives, particularly against the Kurds. Ideological ties exist too. Turkish democracy has declined, and authoritarianism has grown under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Erdogan, like Putin, supports the civilization state idea and has expanded Turkey's foreign policy in neo-Ottoman ways. However, if Russia crossed the nuclear threshold, Turkey would struggle to retain relations. Turkey is vulnerable to nuclear attack not only due to its geography and NATO membership, but also because it shelters American tactical nuclear weapons. Turkey's best interests are to keep the nuclear genie in its lap, and failing to oppose Russia would force the West to deal with the NATO odd man out. If Russia used nuclear weapons, Turkey would have to choose the West and forsake Russia to survive economically. Russia's second important relationship post-invasion is India. Indian energy sales have helped Moscow weather Western sanctions and are now Russia's third largest customer. New Delhi has long wanted Russian weapons like the S-400 and T-90 tanks for security. With Russia, India has been in a bind. A more aggressive China is its biggest national security threat despite its non-aligned status. This dilemma has pushed India into American foreign policy, especially through the quadrilateral security discussion. Deadly border confrontations in 2022 raised the importance of U.S. relations. India has walked the tightrope between the U.S. and Russia. Washington tolerates India's cozy connection with Russia because defeating China is its top geopolitical objective. If Russia went nuclear in Ukraine, everything would change. India, like Turkey, will likely have to break ties with Russia to trade with the West's stronger economies and protect its national security. What about China? Moscow's top relationship is with Beijing. China is Russia's biggest energy buyer. Electronic components and other essential goods targeted by Western sanctions depend on it. Russian foreign reserves are presently stocked with Chinese yuan due to booming trade. This currency is only good for commerce, and since the West's economy is cut off, Russia must maintain trading with China to live. Can't hedge bets. China knew and leveraged this advantage. Xi Jinping may agree with Putin in undermining the U.S.-led world system, but he has not provided military aid for fear of breaking off trade with the West. After Xi's 2023 conference with Putin, both presidents agreed that nuclear countries should not deploy such weapons outside. Russia deployed tactical nukes to Belarus months later, possibly to break the paradigm that it's now the junior partner. The use of these weapons by Russia would be different. Russia's use of nuclear weapons would have forced Xi to act more forcefully against Russia if he had been unwilling to grant military aid for fear of disrupting trade relations with the West. China is already struggling economically. It grew by 3% in 2022, which is low by its norms, and has declined since Xi gained office. Russia would suffer serious severance from already strained relations with the West if China refused to join the world in imposing costs for breaking the nuclear taboo. For these reasons, French troops on Ukrainian land would not inevitably cause Putin to use nuclear weapons, especially if they are few. However, a full-scale French deployment would threaten Russian forces in Ukraine. Russia has suffered greatly against an outnumbered and outgunned Ukrainian military. A better equipped and trained French force would likely cause more harm. If Putin can't win the war conventionally, he may employ tactical nuclear weapons to flip the tide. Putin faced the terrible choice of losing the war and losing power, or nuclear retaliation, and the loss of Russia's most significant commercial links because France is nuclear-armed. Before something catastrophic happens, Russia's elite should whisk him off and transfer him to an isolated Dacia. French intervention, especially without friends, is improbable. Macron's words and Putin's latest nuclear saber-rattling underscore how high the stakes are in international relations. As the world watches Russia's nuclear buildup, do French troops in Ukraine increase the nuclear threat? Despite Putin's nuclear threats, French forces might change the war's course, forcing Russia to make even tougher decisions. Will the nuclear stalemate escalate dangerously? View our next video to see how this issue may play out. Enjoy your day with your family. See you soon!